Trouble. I've just done 300 Ks today and I broke down. Something's wrong. This bike will not start. It looks like the battery is not charging. And these lovely folk at an old age home, of all places, jump started my bike for me. So it's idling, it's going. I've got another 70 Ks before I get home. And I don't know if I'm going to make it. And this is not where I want to break down.
So I'm just a little bit worried about what I'm going to find here. This is just abuse to nuts. Unbelievable. So you're supposed to do this with an impact wrench, but I don't have one. So I do have an impact hammer.
This is not what you want to see on a case.
You know, you get that little voice at the back of your head that says, hey, you're gonna break something here.
So I'm about to hit the last stretch of highway. I've got about 30 Ks left, give or take. All the lights that I could switch off has been switched off. I'm not using my indicators. I'm trying my best not to brake. I'm just keeping this engine idling. Incredibly, I actually am still moving forward. If she can make this last bit of highway, I might actually just be home free. And then we can fix her up.
So a couple of tricks before I get started. Everyone knows the trick of taking a piece of cardboard and putting the bolts in as it came out, easy peasy. Another trick you can do is you just mark the sequence of tightening or loosening, and then you know you're going to tighten it and loosen it in the right way, and you don't need to worry about looking at your manual. Much easier if it's in front of you. Another trick is I normally put a black plastic bag or any plastic over the container that I'm going to use. Even though this has been drained, when I pull it off it's still going to make a mess. This makes it much easier to clean up afterwards, and that's a win. So with all these covers, these two center bolts actually go through to the back cover, and they need to be loosened first. So no matter what you do, just loosen those two. And what I normally do is I just untorque these and then keep the cover on, easy peasy. Let's go from there. You can see whoever worked with this didn't use a torque wrench. Some are loose, some are tight. Like those are really tight. And I'm following the sequence in the manual in reverse, because that's how you should do it. And there we go. Everything ready to be put back in the right order. That works nicely. Now normally you need to tap this thing with a hammer. Hey, it's actually loose. Okay, that's lucky. Check the mess. Okay. Alright, there we go. And isn't that beautiful?
Don't change, don't change, don't change. Oh, are you kidding me? So every time I stop at a stop street or stop at a robot or something like that, I'm like, normally you would hear that beautiful sound of the Harley, potato, potato, potato. All I'm hearing is, please don't stall, please don't stall, please don't stall. Oh man, I've got another 40 Ks to go. Come on, just make it 40 Ks. 40 Ks, you can do it. Oh.
So you're supposed to do this with an impact wrench, but I don't have one, so I do have an impact hammer. Yeah, that's not going to work. That's a quick way to do a lot of damage to a bike. You actually do need to have a pneumatic hammer, and you can do it with a small compressor. You don't need a big compressor. The only trick is to keep your air lines very short, and then a sort of standard pneumatic wrench will work just fine. It is really easy. Just make a wedge like this. You stick it in, and you'll notice I put it at the top, and then I check that the chain isn't touching the casing. That looks good. The clutch basket is done first, and that is a left thread, so you need to turn clockwise. Really, really easy. Now remember, this side is like normal, lefty loosey, righty tighty. That one's different. That's in place, and let's give this a whirl. There we go. Easy peasy. Now I deviated here from the manual, which calls for a long bar. So these need to come off as one piece because it's a continuous chain. So all of this needs to stay together. I'll just put that down there for now. And that there. Oh, there's not a problem. There we go. Ah, okay. Yeah, you can immediately see the problem. I mean, the insulation around the coils is actually melted in some places. Let me show you.
So this coil's in really bad shape. I could immediately see that the wires were damaged when I took it out. So that's not a good sign. And that's just temperature and old age. And these are incredibly brittle, these wires. But there's definitely a grounding fault somewhere on the coil. So if you just take a measurement from your plug to a ground point, there should be no continuity, and I'm getting a dead short. So the coil is shorted somewhere to the iron core. So this does need to be replaced.
So there's a guy that I follow on YouTube that bought himself a 2024 Road Glide, and a lot of his sort of videos are upgrading the bike, you know, putting in new Olim shocks, and look, I really enjoy his videos. His videos are great. It's good content and it's fun watching. He says he's an engineer, so obviously he's pretty handy with sort of bolts and spanners and stuff like that. But I can't help thinking to myself, why would you buy a brand new bike if you like tinkering? I mean, that bike cost him $30,000 and some change, I think it was. I mean, that in South African rands is like a gazillion rand. And all the upgrades and other stuffies that he's done to the bike has probably added on a whole lot more gazillions. Where if I was him, I would have bought a really old school Harley that could do with a bit of tinkering and just have fun. Because if you buy yourself a, what's the equivalent of like a 60,000 rand bike in US dollars, it's like $2,000 or something. I mean, you'll have so much fun.
So before I put this back together, there's a couple of things that I needed to fix. The drain plug for the primary case had worn out, so I needed to machine a new taper plug that was slightly oversized, and the hole was just tapped just a little bit more so that I can get a good seal. This is way better than what was in the box, so that should work nicely. And then the bush for the starter jackshaft looked horrific. Now this had a PTFE lining on the inside, and they do that typically so that it can run without oil. Now this hole at the side here is actually not an oil hole. It's for when the jack shaft goes in, it doesn't create pressure at the back, and you can get the pressure out from the back and there's no resistance going in and out. Okay, easy peasy. The problem is that's not going to oil this bearing. So they typically make the bearing with a PTFE lining. Thing is that PTFE doesn't last very long, and it doesn't like a shaft pushing in the wrong direction because you tend to scrape off the PTF lining and it wears really quickly. The best bearing material for a bush application like this is phosphor bronze. You do need to oil it. So what I did is I made an oil hole at the top through the bearing all the way through the casing to the back here. And as the chain goes round, that fills up with oil, and this bearing will always have oil. This is a really cool mod. The problem is, when I made this, there was a few disasters. It went a little something like this. So if I get this just right, it should be a self-cleaning oil hole. Oh shit, the drill's just broken in there. Now I'm in guck. This is not what you want to see on a case. So there are many ways to get a broken drill out, but one like this, if you can just get a little piece of bar to stick to it, then you can work it out without breaking it. There we go. So you're just going to drive in this bushing, and I'll put this in the freezer just for a couple of minutes so it's nice and cold. And this driving mandrel is aluminium, so it keeps it nice and cool while I drive it in. And that's just a light press fit. So the hole that I drilled in the outer casing is a 2mm hole, but the oil hole in the bearing is a 1mm, and that just helps with alignment. So to check if this is aligned, just stick a wire through. Oh, that's pretty good. Okay, so the wire is going through, so that's aligned. Removing this bearing is the same way as just cutting a line over there and then taking it out. But this bearing will last forever, way longer than the original. So I'm quite chuffed with this.
So replacement gaskets are easily available, but they do cost a pretty penny. And look, they will seal really, really well. There's no doubt about that. But I generally make my own gaskets because they cost nothing to make. And if you do it properly, you actually won't have a big problem with leaking. You do need to make sure that your sealing surface is flat and there's no sort of burrs or nicks. So I've already done that. I've cleaned the surface. This is a cool trick. If you just take a drill bit and you put a little bit of marking glue on and you put it down the holes, you make a perfect mark. And of course that's a problem with a lot of homemade gaskets. They don't work because they're not a good fit. So you need to get all the basics right. Otherwise they're not going to work. And I also don't use any sealant with gaskets like this because it makes taking off the cover later incredibly difficult. So on my vintage bikes, I use the same paper and I don't have any issues with leaks. So I think if you're careful, you'll actually get pretty good success. Another thing you need to do is these gaskets don't keep for very long. They become brittle and old. So what I normally do is I keep them in in a garbage bag. I wrap them up in a garbage bag so that they don't dry out. Because if you keep them out without sort of putting them in a bag, they tend to dry out and then they crack and then they don't seal properly. So it's a good idea to keep them in a bag.
Getting parts, new parts is like Christmas. I love it. And look how beautiful these parts are. I am super chuffed. And obviously it's always good just to check that you don't have any grounding faults, which looks perfect. And then your ohms over the coil should be 0.1 to 0.3. Yeah, that's pretty good. So this coil is fantastic. Oh, it actually looks beautiful. And they have the nice hold down for the connectors. I think this is going to work really, really well. And obviously, if you replace your coil, you really should replace your voltage regulator while you're at it. And this is the voltage regulator that I got. It looks absolutely fantastic. This is a beautifully machined voltage regulator. I am super chuffed with this. This is going to look fantastic on the bike. Way better than what I had on the bike.
I am really worried at the moment. The bike is going okay, but I know she's not charging. I know that there's a problem. If I stall now, I'm stuck. And this is such a dodgy area. I mean, the whole of Joburg is a dodgy area, but this is not where I want to break down. And look, I haven't stalled my bike in years, but I'm stressing, I'm worried. Please don't stall, please don't stall. Every robot I stop at, I'm worried.
So finally we can put this bike together. Assembly is pretty much the same as disassembly with a couple of tricks here and there, but for the most part, use torque wrench and Loctite wherever necessary, where the manual calls for it. There are one or two things that I would change when assembling, but So these plugs are incredibly tight in the casing, so a little bit of oil makes it go in so much easier. The manual actually says oil or soap. I'm not so sure I would want to put soap in here, but anyway. So a little bit of blue Loctite is required on all of these bolts, so that this thing stays where it's supposed to stay. And the torque is surprisingly low. It's like 5 Newton meters. Of course, don't forget the little cable hold, which I don't know if you're supposed to put Loctite on, but to be honest, I don't want anything coming loose over there, so it won't hurt, that's for sure. Now before I go any further, let's just check that this coil is working and we don't have a dead short. So that would be a dead short, and anywhere on the casing is open circuit on both terminals. Alright, that's good. And let's just double check the ohms. Still good. So remember earlier on in the video, I had to use a pneumatic wrench to take off the compensator nut. I did try a long lever, but you know, you get that little voice at the back of your head that says, hey, you're going to break something here. Well, I heard that voice, so I decided to use the pneumatic wrench to get this undone. And the reason why that's probably not such a good idea is because these magnets come loose. So look, I've checked the magnets, they look alright. Let's see how it goes. Was it a bad idea? I hope not. We'll see. But the magnets do look fine, so it should be fine. So the two drive components require a slightly more potent Loctite. One of the first things I checked when I got this bike was the tension on the primary chain, and it was incredibly tight, way outside of spec. That's one of the things you need to check with unscrupulous mechanics, that they do tighten this properly like it should be. The reason why they do that, they make it incredibly tight. The engine does run quieter, but things wear a lot quicker, which is good for them, because down the road you're going to bring the bike back. Not good for the bike. So we're going to do that properly. There are a few old school tricks to get these gaskets to stay in place. But what I've found is if you use the paper punch, the holes are perfect for M6, or in this case 1/4 inch screws, and then you can actually put the screws in the casing and it'll hold them in place. So if you just put a screw in and just give it 1 or 2 turns, then that gasket will stay in place. So then you don't need to put grease on it or any sealant or anything. So that's typically what I do when I place a gasket like this. And then of course, I wouldn't forget, in this case, to oil that bush that I made earlier.
So I'm about 10 k's away from my house, and my bike has just started to stutter a little bit. I don't know if I'm going to make it. And yeah.
This new voltage regulator is going to look really cool. There are a couple of things that I modified on it before I'm going to put it on the bike. All the places that need to be ground, I took away the paint so that I get a good grounding surface. I also made a new grinding line because this is the front of the bike. The old grinding line is probably fraught, so it's time for a new one. And again, that surface was nicely cleaned. The only other thing I do with these is I put a whole lot of copper slip on all the grinding parts, then I know that I've got a good ground. That is typically the biggest failure of these voltage regulators. But other than that, you stick it on, you follow the lines, and easy peasy, plug and play.
So it's been about 2 weeks since I've done the repairs on the bike. I've checked everything. I went through all the electricals, made sure it was charging like it should. And obviously I took it for a couple of test drives. And you always worry that, you know, when you work on a bike, you made a mistake somewhere. And I haven't had any worrying sort of clanking noise that could ultimately end up in an explosion and your work just going out of the window. But anyway, I'm on my way back to that old age home where I stopped on the way home, and I'm going to tell those old ladies that helped me what rock stars they are. I'm going to show them that I fixed up the bike, and I'm going to have a cup of tea. I think that's what I'm going to do today. Guys, I had lots of fun making this video. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it's useful and helpful to you guys. She made it home. That was a very interesting trip.